My parents have owned a tavern/restaurant for 14 years in my small town. My father is someone who likes to start new projects and is a well-known person in our town. One day he was contacted by the local realtor to offer my father a private showing of a historical hotel that had been up for sale. This hotel has been around for decades and went from hotel to restaurant to bar with little success. Everyone who had owned it before put it back on the market within a year. The bank had the title now, and the realtor told my father, if you don't plan to buy it and fix it up, they're going to rip it down. A lot of people in the town thought that the only person who could save it was my father, so he bought the hotel. My parents kept the downstairs bar and renovated the upstairs for apartments. This is when odd things started to happen. My father would come home almost every night with the camera footage to show my mom and I. The footage always showed an empty pool room with small, random orbs floating in the foreground. My father is a believer in the paranormal, but my mother is not, so her and I both chalked it up to bugs and dust. Although I will agree, the way the orbs zigzagged around the room was weird, but it still seemed like nothing. A month goes by and my father comes home early on a Sunday from working down at the hotel. He walked into the house, looking spooked. Something my father rarely ever is. He detailed out how he was behind the bar, checking on receipts from the night before, when he heard footsteps approaching from the hallway entrance. We don't open on Sunday, but if someone my dad knew saw his truck in the parking lot, they would just walk in to see him. So he didn't find the footsteps odd at all. Without looking up from his receipts, he called out, "We're not open, but give me a sec." He heard the footsteps enter the bar room and take 6 more steps toward him before stopping. Taking another second to finish going over the last night's shift, he looked up and peered around the wooden support beam, and there was no one. He said he got out of there so fast, he doesn't even remember locking the door behind him. My mom obviously thinks he's crazy, but I am freaked. That place always gave me the creeps, but my father confirming my fears made me want to never step foot in that building again. 2 days ago, my mom had an experience there that sent her out the door faster than my dad. She was in the bar room before opening hours collecting the shift money from the night before. She wasn't there for more than 5 minutes before she started to hear the faint sound of music coming from the entrance hallway. She said she ignored it for a while, assuming it was one of the tenants upstairs. After collecting the money, she went to leave and the music started getting louder. She said it sounded like old waltz music, piano-based, and that it was clear as day. The further she walked down the hall toward the bedrooms, the more prominent the noise became. As she stepped in front of the women's restroom, she said it sounded like someone was in there playing the music on their phone. By this time, my mom was sufficiently freaked out and ran out of rational reasoning behind what it could be. Just as she was about to open the door, she said she heard the water turn on and off twice before she left the building. In the parking lot, she called my dad to come down, certain that someone had been in there with her. But when he came to check it out, no one was there. Now my mom is a believer, and we are both properly terrified of that creepy old hotel. My mom had always told me that I was gifted. I could always feel energies. I had dreams of things that would come to happen. I wouldn't say I'm a medium or anything like that. I've never communicated with spirits. More so, I'd say I attract them. We hopped apartments a lot when I was younger, and no matter where we went, an entity would immediately find me. I'd have recurring nightmares, see figures, be scratched, etc. You could say spirits liked to pick on me. Another random fact that will come into play later. I had bright blue eyes, like my mother. We moved into this apartment, and things immediately went very, very poorly. I had a dream that only lasted seconds. I was in a bright white room, and there was this beast on the ceiling, and it looked into my eyes and roared. It was so incredibly loud. I woke up and my mom and her boyfriend at the time had rushed to my aid because they heard me let out a scream that sounded like a deep, full-grown man's scream, not a prepubescent boy's. My eyes turned hazel with brown splotches and have been that way ever since. I was terrified. We moved me into my big brother's room. That night I felt a presence, opened my eyes, and I saw a shadowy figure reach out and try to grab me. I sprinted out of the room and slept next to my mom or on the couch in the living room from then on, but I always felt watched from the hallway leading to my bedroom. Another thing that happened was when I was laying in bed with my mom and her boyfriend, she looked up and saw a little girl in a petticoat standing in the hallway. He saw it too. I was asleep, and only knew this because they told me years later. Anyhow, everyone was being terrorized for months, and eventually we had enough. We hired someone to come in, and she immediately detected a demonic presence. She had informed us that the building used to be a medical waste facility. They'd dispose of and store blood in the basement. That sort of thing. My mom has told me since that she was able to confirm this detail, but to be truthful, I never asked how. Thinking about and speaking about this incident brings me terrible feelings. Anyhow, she blessed the place, and it didn't really do anything. We tried writing scripture on the walls and this sort of highlighter stuff that you could only see in UV light. We put up some crosses, that sort of thing. It only served to make whatever it was angrier. We eventually moved out, and my mom spoke clearly as we left. "We're leaving. You are not allowed to follow us." I've never had another experience with a spirit. A friend of mine who says that she is a medium, I'm not sure what I believe about this sort of thing, told me that maybe God, maybe a spirit, maybe myself, walled myself off spiritually from my gift. I think that maybe it was the same spirit tormenting me my entire life up until that point. When I think about this, tears immediately begin pouring from my eyes. I'm 20 now, and this was easily one of the most turbulent times of my life. I would like to share my recent experience. This is absolutely true and in no way fabricated. I have been shaken up immensely and my perspective on reality has definitely changed. I live in India and my family is Protestant Christian. My upbringing and the things taught to me in terms of faith have included an aspect of the supernatural and the spiritual. Though it was always told to me that demons and spirits of darkness exist, I was always a skeptic. I believed in proof, evidence, and logic. In my opinion, exorcisms were staged and everything about it was fake, until I had what seems to be my own personal experience with the demonic. This happened about a week ago. I was on my bed, playing a racing game on my phone at 2 a.m. The lights were off, and the only light was that of my phone. I usually put my AirPods on and keep my volume on full as I enjoyed the loud engine revving sounds of the game. I started feeling an ache in my back, and this made me think I was having another bout of kidney stone pain. It runs in my family. My way of coping with it is to just ignore it and move on with things. I've had multiple stones in my body, so I have learnt to manage the discomfort well by now. As I continued with the game, I started feeling breathless as the air was heavy. It came to a point where I thought something was definitely wrong. There was a dull pain in my stomach and head too. The sounds and music of the game I was playing became very muffled and scary. I managed to pull out my headphones and lie down. I laid out on the bed, on my back, looking up at the ceiling, wondering what was going on. My wife is working abroad for now, and I really wanted to ring her. I was not able to do that, however, because somehow logic and common sense had taken a back seat at that moment. I just wasn't able to think clearly. My palms and forehead were covered in sweat, and felt crushed, like under weight of something terribly heavy. I honestly thought I was about to die. My mom had visited me in March of this year and has not been able to since leave and head back to her own house due to the lockdown. So she was sleeping in the guest room and usually fast asleep at that hour. My mom is a very deep sleeper and rarely gets up for anything in the night. During all this madness that I was going through, she just woke up and came to my door and knocked. I heard the knocks, and I wanted to say, "Please come in and help me," but my mind was too confused to do anything. She heard some groaning-like sounds coming from me and decided to let herself in. When I looked at her, I wanted to say help, but apparently I kept saying, "Just let me be. Let me die in peace." My mom told me this later. When she saw me in the state that I was, without any hesitation she touched my head and said, "In the name of Yeshua, I bind you, rebuke you, and cast you out." I felt the immediate sensation of wanting to puke. I rushed to the loo and did so. Instantly I felt better, and my mind began working correctly. I could think straight and had no trouble breathing. The whole recovery didn't take more than a couple of minutes. While I know that this can be dismissed as a simple case of indigestion or acidity, food poisoning, or even an anxiety attack, here are some reasons why it's got to be more. 1. The probability of my mom walking in that time was very low. Later, when I asked her why she came in at that hour, she simply said, "Because I felt like I should." Like a prompting in my spirit. 2. Why would I say things like, "Just let me die"? Any person in need of medical attention will cry for help rather than wanting to be left alone. 3. Why did I need to puke just after my mom said those words? 4. I had eaten dinner at 5 p.m. If it had something to do with that, why would it surface at 2 in the morning the next day? And 5. About a month before all this happened, I had a nightmare about an entity in my room. Something that looked like a black being with red eyes and teeth like a wolf, grinding its teeth at me or making low-pitched growls. I was scared after that, but I had dismissed it and moved on. I am really beginning to think that what I went through was a spiritual demonic oppression, which retreated due to the compulsion from a higher spiritual authority. This is from 2015. But I really remember it like it was yesterday. It happened in Yokosuka, Japan, while I was stationed there with the Navy. I was out during the day walking and exploring Tokyo, and when I finally went back to the base, I didn't want to return to the ship for the night, so I stayed at the Navy Lodge on base. It had an open floor plan, so the only doors were the front door and the door to the bathroom. I had just went to sleep when I woke up randomly and I had sleep paralysis and couldn't move. I could only move my eyes to look around the room. It was like something was holding my body to the bed. Then I saw and heard the front door open and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. Then I saw and heard the front door open and the light from the hall start to creep into my room. The door slowly closed, and then I saw a big shadow figure with white, glowing eyes move from the front door kitchen area on the right over to the living room on the left. slowly moving and keeping its eyes locked on me at all times. As it got around the corner to the living room, it stayed there for a few seconds before peeking its head around the corner and staring at me again before hiding back around the wall. I woke up and was able to move again, so I jumped out of bed and ran around the room, turning all the lights on, trying to find whatever it was. But nothing was there. I laid back on the bed and tried to fall asleep again, and almost as soon as I closed my eyes, it happened again. I couldn't move and could only look around the room. The thing then moved from the left from the living room to the right again where the bathroom was, and continued to stare at me with its white, glowing eyes the whole way. It opened the door and triggered the motion light in the bathroom. The light had a creepy blue glow to it that I still remember vividly. As it disappeared behind the wall again, it once more peeked around the corner, staring at me with its white glowing eyes for another 5 to 10 seconds, before going back into the bathroom and closing the door behind itself. I woke up again and jumped out of bed and ran around the room looking for it, leaving the bathroom the last place that I would check. I could see the blue motion activated light on in the bathroom from under the door. I finally threw the door open and went inside, throwing the lights on, and nothing was there. I went back to my bed, laying down again and trying to sleep, just hoping that I was imagining all of it. Then it happens again, but this time it feels like something is covering my mouth too. I can hardly breathe as I see the bathroom door open, letting the blue light seep into the rest of the room as it moves around the corner staring at me with its white glowing eyes, as this time it moves to the foot of my bed, standing there for a few seconds and then, almost as if it's extending its body, stretches all the way to where it's only a few inches away from my face, staring directly into my eyes with its own white, glowing ones. I'm trying to flail my arms and scream out at it to leave, when I'm finally able to get out a "fuck off" before it disappears right in front of me. This is by far the spookiest experience my family and I have had regarding the paranormal. I'm currently living in Australia, and this all started when I moved into my current house around 3 years ago. In my culture, we believe that whenever a family moves into a new home, a priest should come to perform various prayers to bless the house. However, when my mom bought the house, we immediately went on holiday for 3 months, so we were unable to perform the rituals. Everything started when we first came back home. Just some background, my mom raised me on her own, so it was just the two of us staying in the house at the time. I was still in high school, and my mom worked in the city, so we both took the train every morning. She always left home earlier than me, so it was my job to lock up each day. She also worked late almost every day, so I would get home first and be home alone for at least 5 hours. One morning as I left home, I began to feel paranoid that I had not locked the door, so I walked back to check it. The door was locked. Later that day, when I came home, I walked up my driveway to find that the door was wide open. I freaked out, but was brave enough to go inside. Our kitchen is pretty close to the entrance, so I grabbed a knife and searched the entire house. There was no one there. I decided to not tell my mom because she was really stressed with work and I didn't want her to freak out too. Over the next few days, another strange thing started to happen. Our garage door would randomly open whenever we were home. My mom was kind of scared, but then we thought maybe our neighbor's garage remote functioned at the same frequency or something and it was activating our door too, so we dismissed it. It had been about 2 months since we were living in our new house, and everything seemed to be normal again. Until one day when I was awoken in the middle of the night by my mom. She looked super scared and asked me if I had come into her room to wake her up. I said no, I was half asleep and had no idea what she was rambling on about. She didn't believe me and made me swear that I hadn't. I always play scare pranks on my family, so that was why. I swore I didn't and asked her what was up. She is a super light sleeper, and so while she was sleeping, she heard someone prop her door open. She looked up and saw the figure of a boy and thought it was me. She asked it, "What's wrong?" and blinked. There was nothing there, and her door was still open. She called my name a few times and there was no response, hence why she came to my room. I have to admit, given the stuff happening with the doors, I was kinda scared, but I convinced my mom that she was imagining things and she went back to sleep. Ever since that night, and up to this day, my mom still sleeps with her door open and the living room light on. And I do not blame her after what happened next. 2 weeks after this incident occurred, my mom's best friend and her son and daughter, who were both around my age, came over from our homeland, Malaysia, to visit us. I was really excited, as I have always been close to them. One thing you should know about my aunt. She's had many experiences growing up with the paranormal, and so she is super afraid of ghosts. For this reason, me and her kids always used to play pranks on her. One day the 4 of us were playing poker on the dining room table while my mom was taking a nap in the living room. Suddenly my mom rushes out of the living room, her eyes wide open, and she looked terrified. She asked who had woken her up from her nap. The 4 of us were dumbfounded, as we had just been playing cards the entire time. She then told us that she felt someone tap her shoulder while she was asleep. When she opened her eyes, there were 2 feet on the floor. Once again she blinked, and the feet were gone, and there was no one there. My mom was having a full-on breakdown, especially after what had happened the other night. Then my aunt, given how afraid she was of ghosts, started to melt down as well. I didn't want her holiday to be ruined, so I managed to convince them that my mom was probably in the middle of a dream, so when she woke up, she was most likely hallucinating. Yeah, I know, it sounds stupid, but hey, it worked. But then the next day, something else happened. My mom had gone to the shops to get groceries. The kids and I were playing video games in the living room, while their mom was having a shower. Suddenly we hear the bathroom door burst open, and out runs my aunt wrapped in her towel. She screamed at us, telling us to stop trying to scare her, and that it wasn't funny. The 3 of us were extremely confused, and her daughter asked her what had happened. She told us that she knew we were the ones knocking on the bathroom door, even after she told us to stop 3 times. I know it probably seems like she was overreacting, but again, I cannot emphasize her fear of ghosts. I exchanged a concerned look with her kids, and then told her that it genuinely was not us, and that we were playing FIFA the entire time. Soon my mom got home and we told her what happened also. Let's just say that my aunt started sleeping with her room lights on for the rest of her trip. Soon she and her kids had gone home, and it was back to me and my mom again. We returned to our regular routine. My mom was finally at peace, and she hadn't seen anything for a while apart from the garage door opening on its own every now and then. The same, however, could not be said for me. It seemed that it had become my turn to be tormented. As I mentioned before, with my mom at work, I would be home alone for a few hours every day. I began to start to hear things. The strange bit is that it would never occur while I was in the living room. Whenever I went to use the toilet or went to sit in my room, I would start hearing things coming from the living room and kitchen. It started out small, just the sound of some panting like if you had run a marathon, that kind of panting. But the minute I entered the living room, nothing. There would be no sound at all. It soon started to get worse. I would hear footsteps pacing around outside my room and spoons and pots falling in the kitchen. But every time I step out into the living room again, the noises would stop, and everything would be just as I left it. There was even a time when I thought I heard a kid laughing right outside the door when I was in the toilet. I decided not to tell my mom again because she seemed to be getting over her experiences and I didn't want to scare her all over. But one day I felt that I needed to tell her, and we decided that day that it was time we contacted our priest to perform the prayers for our house. It was the day my best friend and his parents came over for dinner. When it all began, it was a completely innocent meal. My best friend and his family are Malaysian too, and we were having a great time talking about home while having a signature Malaysian dish. My friend's dad was telling us a story when all of a sudden his face just froze and his eyes widened. He honestly looked like he was having a stroke. His face contorted into a frown and he just stared down at the table. My mom and I shared a worrying look, but my friend and his mom just continued eating like nothing was happening. Suddenly, his dad seemed to return to us, and he continued telling the story as if nothing had occurred. But he could see that my mom and I were visibly concerned. Suddenly, his wife tapped his shoulder and said, "Just tell them." He frowned at his wife and just kept eating. There was an awkward silence for a few minutes, and then he finally decided to address the elephant in the room. He apologized for scaring us and assured us that there was no need to worry. He then went on to tell us about his life. Since he was a child, he had been very religious, and from a young age he felt a very close connection to God. He regularly meditated and was very, very spiritual. So spiritual that when he was in his mid-20s, he had awoken with a gift. He was able to see dead people. I kid you not, when he said this, I immediately looked at my friend, waiting for him to start laughing at some prank. But my friend's face was completely serious, and he continued looking at his dad as the man told his story. He told us he could see them everywhere, when he was walking his dog on the street, when he's sitting in the park, in people's houses, and even sometimes sitting on people who had been possessed. He said the spirits were drawn to him because they knew that he could see them, and they would stalk him, begging him to help them reach the afterlife. He said there was simply nothing he could do because these people had died before their time, and they would simply have to wait on Earth until it was their time. Back home, he was regularly contacted by people having paranormal experiences to perform a cleansing or drive evil spirits away. He told us about some of those experiences, but I don't feel like it's my place to share them here. He then asked us something that gave me chills. "Have you guys performed prayers for your house yet?" My mom refused to answer the question until he told her why he had asked it. He said that he didn't want to worry us, but that if we hadn't, we probably should. My mom continued to ask him why until he finally conceded. This is what he said. "Remember when I had that moment just now while I was talking? I had a visit. I won't tell you what it was, but it was the same spirit that I saw standing at the front door when we came in here." That's when my mom told him everything that had been happening. It was during this time that I also decided to tell my mom about the things that I had been hearing in the house. My friend's dad then told us that he did not think it was a malicious spirit, but to be safe, and that it was time for us to conduct the prayers. Before he left, he asked my mom if he could see our altar in the prayer room. My mom took him to it and we all followed. As he stood in front of the altar, his whole body shook, as if he just had a huge hiccup. He then put his hands together and bowed his head. Before leaving, he said, "I can see why the two of you have not been hurt. You're protected." That concluded our visit. A week later, we arranged for a priest from our local temple to cleanse and bless our home. I promise you that ever since that day, nothing strange has ever happened in our house. Even the garage door has stopped opening on its own. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I have learned my lesson. I will never move into a house without performing the rituals that my culture demands. The scariest thing that ever happened to me came from the person closest to me. My ex-husband and I were both only 19 when we married. When we first met, everything was glorious. I moved in with him and his family because me and mine were having a lot of trouble at the time, and for the first year, all was golden. Then one day, his stepdad went missing. The police found his body almost a week later, murdered. The tragedy tore through the three of them, Nikki, his mother, and sister, with an intensity similar to a massive hurricane. If Nikki's biological father had been present, that might have been one thing, but that piece of human excrement was not just absent, but only made the occasional appearance to steal one of the kids' social security checks from the mail on arrival, and that was usually when he knew no one would be home. When Fiona married Dave, he had become their father. The only father they ever really had. He was their true family. After the homicide, Nikki's whole personality shifted toward darkness. He would rant and rave like a man possessed, and become violent if I didn't do everything he told me to do, no matter what it was. To this day, I have scars from a physical altercation with his sister on being commanded to attack her and having no choice but to do so, for example. The scars make me who I am now, a survivor, but I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone. Being terrified for your life every single day and never knowing if any given moment could lead to your last is exhausting and traumatizing to say the least. One day we got into it so badly that I told him I wanted to divorce. He kicked me out of my own car at my parents' house and tore out of the driveway, spraying gravel everywhere and leaving puffs of dust floating up toward the sky. I was utterly distraught by the entire situation at that point, completely at my wit's end. Yet for some reason I still loved him, still wanted to make things work out, and for us to be together. So when he called and begged for the chance just to talk things over, of course I agreed, and went outside to anxiously await his return to pick me up. I expected him to have calmed down by the time he arrived. At least, that was what his tone had suggested over the phone. But when I got in the car, the whole vibe felt off, chaotic. The tension was almost physically too much to handle. We rode in silence for about 5 minutes before he shot me a quick glare and then returned his attention to the road. His dark eyes drilled right through me, their anger giving off a certain glint like that of coal. "You know you're my wife, right?" he asked in a syrupy, sickly sweet voice. "That means you belong to me." I didn't really know how to respond, so I said nothing. My mind turned 1,000 miles an hour, deciphering what he was telling me, though. His level of possessiveness over me had steadily increased in the past 6 months or so after Dave's death, as if he were terrified of me disappearing along with the glue that had held together his tiny little broken family. My subconscious screamed at me that the whole thing had been a ruse, a trick to lure me back into the car. I looked down at my hands in my lap, wringing them together until my knuckles turned red. "I thought you wanted to fix things," I said. He smirked, and my gut went cold. My worst fears confirmed in that twisted, psychotic expression of his. "What do you think this is?" he replied. It feels like a trick, I told him. He pursed his lips together, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. His shoulders tensed and his expression grew more malvoyant than ever. That's because it was a trick, he murmured. If I can't have you, no one can. Until the moment he said those words aloud, I always thought of that expression as one of those you only ever hear or read in fiction. It never occurred to me that there was a reason that it existed. Someone, or many others most likely, who had heard the phrase and felt the sheer horror that accompanied its implication. In the course of our relationship, I endured punches, kicks, 2 totaled cars, and multiple death threats. A couple of weeks after this incident, I finally managed to get away from him for good. I stayed the night at a friend's house after getting what little things I needed. She lived not far from his grandparents, but I didn't really think anything of it because the neighborhood is one of those upscale, quiet, safe kind of suburbs. We partied most of the night. She went upstairs to sleep around 1 and left me on the couch in the living room watching TV, willing myself to pass out. About an hour later, around 2 a.m., I felt like someone was watching me. I looked over at the sliding doors to my left that led out into the backyard, and there he was. He was standing outside, in the dark, in the rain, watching me and crying with his fists clenched. I felt my eyes grow wide, and I sank slowly down into the leather cushions as if they could make me disappear from sight. I don't know how much longer he was there. When I looked again, he was gone. The next day, my mom came to get me, because he wrecked my car, so I no longer had a ride. He was standing at the corner staring at her as she drove past. We had to get a police escort to take us straight to the station to get a restraining order. I spent the next year getting the divorce straightened out and getting the rest of my belongings that he was trying to hold hostage, like my birth certificate, diploma, and social security card. I spent the next 6 years, even after entering into a wonderful and truly loving relationship, in fear that he would come for me. Even now, 8 years later, sometimes he will still try to contact me through other people or fake accounts on social media. Sometimes the most unsuspecting person is the one you have to worry about. Sometimes all it takes is one tragedy to twist a person completely inside and turn them into a monster on the outside. I was 15 when the first time anything paranormal happened to me at this boarding school. For a month, I would have sleep paralysis. The next month, it got 10 times worse. As well as sleep paralysis, I would feel someone or something patting my head. I would open my eyes, and no one was there. This would carry on for a little while, until one night when I had sleep paralysis again and I looked over to the other side of the room and saw a slightly washed-out figure of a woman wearing a maid's costume. This happened for a couple more nights until I left that school. I came back to that school for sixth form, the last 2 years of high school if you're American. It all started up again when I was moved into that same dorm, but this time she followed me around the school. In the end, I prayed for her. However, she still follows me around when I wear a certain necklace to this day. The last story I have is about 18-year-old me messing around with a Ouija board. Please don't do this. So my boyfriend at the time was the one who bought the Ouija board. A good friend had just died a couple of months ago. We messed around with it for a little bit until the planchette started to levitate. I somehow went into a trance for what felt like about 30 seconds. However, I got told it was for 5 minutes. When I came out of this trance, I had 3 scratches down my arm. The hand with scratches was red hot to the touch, but the other was ice cold. Of course, we decided to do it again the next night. Something predicted the future. The first thing it said was fire alarm. The next thing was knee surgery. And the last was asylum. As soon as this happened, the fire alarm went off. A year later, I had knee surgery. And then 6 months later, my ex was admitted to a mental facility. I know this sounds far-fetched, but this is what happened. Again, please don't mess around with Ouija boards. I was sleeping the other night, and I remember waking up, or rather, so it seemed, yet it still felt like I was dreaming. I was lying in bed and remember sitting up and seeing 3 figures standing in my room with a dimly lit blue light coming from somewhere that illuminated them. I don't remember exactly what they said, or rather he said, 'cause the one in the middle was speaking directly to me. I remember his mouth opening in a very inhuman way with the jaw extending further than it should be able to. Their mouth and eyes were black. Not like solid black, but a smoky type of black, so sort of gray, but you could still recognize teeth and such. I remember them saying something about them coming in a few days, but I don't remember what it was exactly. I then remember passing back out and waking up, actually waking up, and seeing some dark form dart across the room and hover directly over my bed. My bed is in a corner, so it was sitting or hovering between the wall and I, with about a 4-inch gap at the top at the time. I then felt a very, very intense sensation of dread and heaviness throughout my entire fiber and being, and recall feeling this for a few minutes while it was just sitting there with my back turned to it. Then, out of nowhere, a sense of euphoria and great peace came over me. No longer did I fear or dread anything, but rather I felt happy, at peace, loved. I don't really know how to describe it. I remember that thing, whatever it was no longer there. I'm not religious, but I am spiritual in the sense of believing and following my own route when it comes to what happens after human death. I believe in a very unique form of reincarnation, in which the soul, essence, energy, consciousness, whatever you want to refer to it as, travels until it finds a new place to call home, and it could span across the entire universe. That being said, I couldn't help but feel like there was actually an evil presence there with me in my room, and a guardian angel or some other known source of good energy cast it out. It was in June of 1972 that my mom and dad told me they were taking a couple of our thoroughbred racehorses to Durango, Colorado, where my father owned land, and where we typically boarded some of the animals during the summer. This trip was nothing unusual, as it occurred rather frequently. The only difference this time was that my mother was going with my dad instead of me. I guess Dad figured that at 13, I was old enough and responsible enough to do the morning and evening chores, which consisted of feeding and watering the remaining horses, which numbered about 8. A few cows, 6 pigs, and a coop full of chickens. There were also always a few wounds that needed to be smeared with ointment. These chores were not exactly rocket science, but it did take a while, so I was glad when Lyle offered to come and help me with each evening. He got a kick out of it, as he enjoyed that kind of thing. I, however, leaned more towards the arts, performing magic, singing, playing the piano, and even doing ventriloquism. In fact, I did it professionally by the time I was 12. I had no intention of staying at the house alone while my parents were gone to Colorado. I was very much afraid of the dark, and especially of being alone. It would be years until I discovered why. I was going to spend the weekend with two of my best friends, Lyle and Mark Harper. Lyle was a year older than I was, and Mark was a year younger, so I fit right into the middle of the two. They lived just 3 houses to the west of my house. I can't really call it a house that I lived in. It was one of 4 duplexes that my dad owned. 2 of them were built back in the early 1920s, and the other 2 were newer, as they were built by my dad a couple of years after we moved there in the late 1960s. The 2 old units, A and B, and the 2 new units, C and D, were split down the middle by our long asphalt driveway. The only other building on the property was a very old and very large white stucco garage/shop, which was located behind the units at the end of the driveway. Beyond that old shop was where the corrals and pastures were. With my parents in Colorado, I was in charge of keeping all the animals fed. Darkness was just around the corner, so I took Lyle and we headed to my place. As we entered my driveway, we started walking between the old units and the new units toward the big garage. What made this shop unique were the giant rolling stainless steel doors, one on the left and one on the right, that met in the middle. It created an almost mirror effect, but not quite shiny enough to be an actual mirror. I happened to be looking at the door, noticing how the street light created just enough glow to make our stretched shadows lightly appear on the big metal doors. I commented to Lyle that I wished I was that tall in real life, and that is when it happened. With both of us looking at our very light shadows bouncing to the rhythm of our steps, another shadow, only very dark, no, black. So black that it looked like a thick, inky, one-dimensional entity, ran clumsily across the shiny door from left to right. It was wearing what looked like a wide-brimmed fedora hat. It had a troll-like appearance, all hunched over as though it didn't want to be seen. It scurried quickly in total darkness until it reached the right side of the doors, after which it completely disappeared. We both stopped, frozen in our tracks, trying to comprehend what we had just witnessed. Before either of us could say anything, the thick, dark shadow man trotted back the other direction, once again disappearing as it reached the other side of the doors. Both of our minds instantly realized that nothing solid had run between us and the doors, and that the only way a shadow could be that dark was, well, there was just no way a regular shadow could be that dark. Without uttering a word, we both turned in sync, as though the movement was choreographed, and took off running back onto 8th Avenue. Neither of us stopped until we arrived back at the safety of Lyle's house. Once inside, we ran to his father, Lloyd, who was watching the news on television, and told him that we needed him. We related our experience, and he said that he was sure that there was a logical explanation. I knew, though, that there was not. He walked back to my house with us, and we began to experiment, attempting to recreate a shadow that was as dark as what we had just seen 10 minutes before. It just wasn't possible. Mr. Harper agreed to stay with us while I did my chores in the now dark back pasture area. It would be years later that I would learn about shadow figures and how they operate. Since then, I have been blessed, or cursed, with several paranormal experiences, from full-body apparitions to simply feeling the presence of spirits. I'm not sure why me, but I am grateful. So my brother had an apartment right next to my mom's. I was staying the night at my mom's, but me and my brother decided to watch a movie at his apartment because he has a bigger TV, and my mom had already fallen asleep. Anyways, we watched a movie or two, and eventually he went to sleep, and I did too not long after. So the dream, or nightmare, started with me laying down in my brother's spare room on a mattress on the floor. And someone had just walked out of the room, so I was alone, and I started looking around. I looked at the closet door, which was right in front of my mattress, and I started staring at the open closet door, when out of nowhere, an all-black face peered around the corner and was staring at me. I had 3 brothers that would all mess with me, so in my dream I started mocking the thing in the closet, and I was saying stuff like, "Oh ha ha, so scary, nice demon impression," and stuff like that. I kept mocking it because I thought it was one of my brothers trying to scare me, and out of nowhere it got super cold, and my chest got super heavy, and the thing in the closet jumped out on all 4s and started hissing. I can't really describe the noise it was making, but it sounded something like a cougar screeching and a snake hissing at the same time, and it was very blood-curdling, and it makes me shiver to talk about it. Anyways, when this started to happen, I began to lose my breath as if it were sucking my soul out of my body, and then it just stopped and crawled back into the closet very contortedly, and I woke up. I was very calm when I woke up, but I had cold sweats, and I was very confused. I sat up on the couch and looked at my brother, who was sitting right next to me, and I told him the whole story, and he was silent for a good minute. My brother told me that he's had multiple dreams like that, and that my mom has too, and he said that he has always had a bad feeling when close to that room, and that he always woke up in the middle of the night thinking that he was being watched. Fast forward to a few months back, and my brother was moving out, and me and my other brother got stuck cleaning that room. I always got a bad feeling when my brother would leave me in there alone and the room was colder than the rest of the house. I haven't had a dream like this since, but then my other brother, whom I haven't spoken of yet, just had a dream similar to mine, and it made me think about it all over again. I have had dreams about ghosts before, and they're all very vivid, and I get the same feeling in all of them. I suspect that I have a demon following me, but I have no clue where it is from. I started to think I had the same demon as my brother and mom, but they have way worse nightmares, and theirs are way more vivid, and they see an actual demon, and not just a figure. The next day, after I had that nightmare, my brother bought sage and salt and started to spread it around his apartment. He also got holy water and put that out too, and drank some of it with me and my other brother. Ever since then, I haven't had a nightmare, but I have had some where I get the feeling that I felt when I had the first nightmare, but they usually go by really fast, and I typically just pray in my sleep, and it goes away. If anyone else has a story about their first experience with sleep paralysis, or simply just a vivid nightmare, feel free to share it. There's always going to be people that will have experienced what you have experienced. This happened about 3 years ago, but has really affected how I think about ghosts and the paranormal ever since. When I tell my friends, some of them find it very creepy, while others say they don't believe in any supernatural things, and while it is odd, they feel there must be some other explanation. I took a family vacation, me, my parents, and 2 siblings, over Christmas. All of us were already adults at this time, and while my family is agnostic and holds out judgment for the afterlife, none of us are religious or believe that there is a true afterlife with heaven or hell. That said, my parents thought it would be fun for us to stay at a haunted hotel in Jerome, Arizona on our way to a resort town further down the road. This whole town is supposedly haunted, but especially the hotel, which used to be a mental hospital that has long since been converted. We checked in and were given 2 of the most supposedly haunted suites because we needed 2 large adjoining rooms for everyone to fit. So far, everything was normal. Until we got to the room. My mom and sisters suddenly smelled something they described as putrid in a spot in one of our rooms. I couldn't smell it, so dismissed it and moved on. We took a walk around the town, and I asked a bakery owner about the haunted stories, and she said it's just accepted that sometimes things fly off her shelves at home, but nothing hostile. Here is where the weird stuff starts. We signed up for the nighttime tour of the hotel in a largish group of people, and we were all given electromagnetic readers while we walked around and heard the stories of the mental patients that died there. Halfway through the tour, my dad and sister hear a sound and turn around to see the doorknob of the room next to them shaking and rattling incessantly. I didn't personally see it, so by this time I was getting bored. I always thought it would be cool if ghosts existed, but didn't really believe they can do anything to affect the physical world. I asked my sister to take some Instagram pictures of me in a cool-looking couch in one of the haunted suites, and she took some quick shots. I passed my hand over the table in front of me to pose, when I felt an extremely cold, chilling sensation in my hand and wrist, and told her to stop. When I looked at the photos, I was shocked. I have a series of 3 pictures where you can see that I'm switching around with a startled look on my face, shaking my hand, and there is a white cloud streaking through my hand and wrist in the photos that appears and disappears throughout the 3 frames. Needless to say, I was frightened. I was no longer willing to sleep on my own, so I took the bed with my mom. Yeah, sad, I know. My dad and sister slept a bit and went to walk around in the middle of the night in the boiler room where they said they had felt some weird stuff. I don't remember exactly what happened, but one of them felt a strong chill on their back. Meanwhile, I was sleeping and my mom suddenly woke and slammed her hand on the dresser. She said sorry and went back to sleep. She's never been a sleep mover, but whatever. I slept pretty deeply that night, but I kept being woken up by a super loud, clanking, rattling sound in the halls that sounded like the gurneys being wheeled back and forth. This is not a busy hotel, and in the middle of the desert. In the morning, my mom said she had a dream that there was a little boy and a young nurse talking to him. Then the nurse aged and became mean and scowling, and raised her hand to hit the boy. She said she then heard a voice telling her to hit him herself. This is why she hit the dresser. Keep in mind that this was a mental hospital, and one of the ghosts there is supposed to be a little boy, but no one knows why or how he died. At the time of this story, I was a 16-year-old high school student. I got a babysitting job for a couple who had a family wedding and needed a babysitter for a super late night. I was referred to them by another family that I used to sit for. Keep in mind, this was when cell phones were just coming out, so I had a really crappy flip phone with a certain amount of minutes. There were 3 kids. The oldest was a boy about 8, the middle boy was about 6, and there was a little girl who was a toddler in diapers and couldn't speak. I came in while the sun was still up to meet the kids while the parents were still there. The parents were so cool. They showed me where all the snacks were and gave me the ground rules for the night. Kids in bed by 7:30, teeth brushed, you know the drill. Once they left, we started eating dinner. To my shock, the middle child, who we'll call Teddy, kept throwing his fork hard at his siblings and pinching his sister with his nails under the table. He kept kicking my shins and throwing his food around the room. The moment his parents left, he became a terror. Their house was old but remodeled, so their toys were in the basement playroom. After dinner, we all went in there to play. As soon as we went down the stairs, it felt wrong. Don't get it twisted. It was a beautiful finished basement with a couch, flat screen, and toys, but something just felt creepy about it. Then the little girl kept pointing at a blank wall. one with no pictures or anything on it, and kept screaming at the top of her lungs and crying. It really unnerved me. At this point, I'm getting a terrible, really bad feeling. So I say, let's go upstairs and watch TV till bedtime. The kids seem to love that idea. So I carry the little girl upstairs and turn on the TV for the three of them and then go back down to grab her favorite stuffed dog and clean up a bit. When I turn around to walk upstairs, I see Teddy smiling a sickening smile at the top of the stairs. He has his hands on the light switch. My stomach dropped. I didn't have my phone or a light, and if this little shit locks me down here, I thought. The light switch is at the top of the stairs outside the stairway, so if he closed the door, I was screwed. And sure enough, he flicked off the lights, cackled, and went to slam the door and lock me in the dark basement. I have never moved so fast in my existence. I flew up the stairs and shoved my hand into the door to keep him from locking me down there. I asked him why he did that and yelled at him to never do that again. All he did was smile at me and then slowly walk away, giggling. I iced my hand and watched him closely for the rest of the night. Bedtime comes around, and I put the kids to bed upstairs without any problems. There were 3 bedrooms, the parents' room at the end of the long hall, then the baby girl's room in the middle, and the boys shared a room with the bunk bed at the end of the hall by the top of the stairs. Everything finally seemed quiet, and I began to forget the horrors from earlier and started watching TV. About an hour after I put her down, the baby girl started screaming through the baby monitor. A scream that sounded like she was in pain. Thinking her brother Teddy was bothering her, I ran upstairs to stop him. As soon as I get to the top of the stairs, I see him laying down on his bed facing the wall. The baby is hysterical and is again pointing at nothing and crying. I am freaked out by now. I rock the baby back to sleep, check on the boys, then return to the living room. What the hell is happening? Am I imagining things? I shake it off and turn the TV back on. This is when the night goes from bad to a total nightmare. Once back in the living room, I start to hear screaming every couple minutes. What sounds this time like a grown man screaming in pain. At first I thought it was outside or maybe a TV or a radio, so I ignored it and kept watching television. But soon it became clear that it wasn't a joke and it wasn't my imagination. It was coming from inside the house. Then I hear what sounds like little feet running upstairs in the hallway. For a second, I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry that Teddy's out of bed 2+ hours after bedtime. I go to the bottom of the stairs and holler up Teddy's name and tell him to go back to sleep. I don't hear a response, but I do hear the footsteps continue. Then I hear what I think is him run into his parents' room at the other end of the hall. Feet pounding down the hallway, clear as day. So I sprint up there, thinking I've caught him in the act. The hall is empty and dark. I turn, and I find Teddy is sitting up in his bed. He's staring at me again with that sickening smile. I could see his brother was asleep on the top bunk, and I could see that his baby sister was asleep on the monitor in my hand. He gave me the creeps. I told him to lay back down. I go back downstairs to the middle floor. I then hear someone walking up from the basement, and I lost it. I slammed and locked the basement door, and I called my house number. My big brother answers, and I tell him that I'm scared. He puts me on speaker, and I explain everything to my family. I babysit every weekend, and I've never had a negative experience or called them like this, so luckily they believed me. My grandpa, being a super religious man, prayed with me and calmed me down. My big brother got into his car and came to sit with me until the parents got home, but the town I was in was a bit of a drive, so he told me he'd be there in 40 minutes. Even after we hung up, I could hear the footsteps running around the house. I am not a religious person, but I sat on the couch and prayed and cried. I have never been so scared in my life. I was terrified. The parents came home before my brother got there and they saw that I had been crying. They asked what happened and I told them everything non-supernatural that occurred because I didn't want them to think I was a crazy person or tell people not to hire me. I just wasn't going to mention it at all. So I just said Teddy was a handful and that was it. As I was leaving, the dad, in a deadly serious voice, said, "Did the ghost bother you?" I slowly turned to him, not fully believing what I had just heard. I asked him if he was being serious. He said, "Oh, I'm being serious. We've had a ghost problem for a while now. Did you experience anything yourself?" I broke down and started crying when I gave them an honest recap of the night. I told them about the screams that I heard, the footsteps, everything. How the baby was crying at the wall and how Teddy tried locking me in the basement. They believed me right away. The parents said they'd moved into the house about 2 years ago after the old man who built the house died inside of it. He was an actual hoarder and fell and injured himself in the basement and died among his piles. Since no one could hear him scream, they didn't find him in time. By all accounts from the neighborhood, he was a mean recluse of a man. Either way, what a terrible way to go. They said they would wake up every night to things flying off of their kitchen counters and doors slamming. They would hear knocks and pounding in the walls. I was shocked. I asked why they stayed in the house if they knew it was haunted. They explained they weren't able to move due to their jobs and current financial situation. I have to admit that although it wasn't huge, it was a beautifully built home. That old construction kind of home with bookshelves built into the walls and a winding grand staircase. The dad said he would go downstairs every night for a year and say, "Go away. This is our home now. You aren't welcome here," over and over. He said eventually the activity stopped. They said it only sparked up when someone new would stay in the house or when they'd have a sitter at night. They said since I quote-unquote knew the truth now, that they would pay me extra to come back because they could never keep a babysitter. Pfft. Yeah, right, I thought. I am never going back there. But I said I'd be in touch, and I ran out of that house. I am ashamed to say that I never answered their calls again. I felt bad, but there was no way in hell I'd ever return there. I still babysit once in a while, and I've never had any experience like that since. I still think of those kids sometimes, and I really think that Teddy was being affected by the spirit there. I've never encountered a child so cruel, so negative. Thinking of his creepy little smile still sends a chill down my back. I hope they were able to move or clear the negative energy. Either way, it's one night I won't forget. Not entirely my story, but the main event happened to my mom when she lived at home with my grandparents. Back when she was a teen, they had a beagle that would often stare down the hallway and growl at nothing, the whole deal. In the middle of the night while lying in bed, my mom heard the dog begin to growl just before she felt someone grab her by the ankles and begin to yank her out of her bed. She says she was halfway pulled onto the carpet before she started saying the Lord's Prayer and the hands let go of her. But her dog was still going absolutely nuts. There have been other little things that have happened there too involving other people in my family. No one seems immensely worried about it, but I've always had the feeling of being watched in that house, even before knowing some of the stories I've heard now that I'm older. It's always the same one. My grandparents have lived in it since it was built when they were first married, so no bad history of the house itself, but perhaps the land that it's on? My grandma has told us stories about seeing shadow figures walking down the hall. My brother smelled my grandpa's cigar smoke in the kitchen during a family event. My grandpa had passed away a couple of years ago. Used to always smoke a certain brand of cigar outside on the back porch. And I once was startled by a loud, raspy cough right behind me while I sat in the empty house playing computer games with the speakers off. Recently, my mom and I had installed some cameras in the basement and on the front and back porches, just for extra security. I'm dreading the day my grandma tells us one of them caught something, and I'll have to see it with my own eyes. It's 12:44 a.m., and 10 minutes ago, I saw a ghost. I live in the basement, which is almost finished, so it isn't the creepy, empty stages anymore. It's really comfortable and homey. Today, though, my parents are putting up a new wall separating my room from the laundry room, so that's the change. It's a little uncomfortable tonight, and I do admit that having such an open space where I could see and not see everything is a little spooky, but I wasn't actively thinking about it, and I was actually really relaxed and just scrolling through TikTok on my phone. This is the setup. I have my bed in the middle of the room, my TV is adjacent from me, on, playing Family Guy. I'm facing left, which is facing the laundry room, and the almost built wall. There's a small landing that goes to my sister's room, which is also in the basement. The back storage room, which the light was on, and then the stairs that go up. My fan, which is also to my left, is on. I can't hear a whole lot besides the fan, my phone, and the TV. My phone is positioned almost directly in front of my face, but with what I saw, it was not in my peripheral, it was directly next to my phone's screen, so I clearly saw it. A half-white figure walked past from the landing into the laundry room. I could only see the bottom half of it. It was clearly opaque white. I thought it was my dog at first, so I sat up and called her name a few times, but she didn't come. Then I thought maybe it was my parents and they just couldn't hear me, but I didn't see the laundry room light turn on, or the washing machine or anything turn on. So I turned on my flashlight and called my dog's name again, thinking that she might be getting into something. When she still didn't come to me, I got up with my flashlight still on and turned the bedroom light on. Then I checked everything out to see if it was my dog, and if she was just being silly, or maybe even if it was a cat. Nothing was there, so I got freaked out and went to my sister's room, which her light was on, and the storage room light was on. My sister wasn't in her room, she was in the garage. So I told her what had happened, and she thinks my mind is probably just playing tricks on me since there's changes going on downstairs, and it's a little scary down there right now. Which, I admit, it is, but I was really comfortable, and about to go to sleep. I have been in those instances where I freak myself out, like watching a scary movie or something, and I convince myself that I heard or saw something, but of course nothing happened, and I sleep fine. But tonight it was different. I just know it. As soon as I figured out that it wasn't my dog or my parents or any cats, I began to feel nauseous and my heart started pounding. Now, this isn't the first time a paranormal experience has happened in this house. It's just the first time in a while. Recently, my grandmother passed away upstairs in what's now my parents' bedroom. My grandfather also passed away in this house in the hallway going to the garage. Every paranormal experience we've had, we know that it was one of my grandparents, since it was never malvoyant and we never felt nervous or scared. I'm not saying the spirit I saw was malvoyant. I do believe that it was my grandma, but it still did freak me out, and I did cry. It's only been a month and a half without her, so it's nice to know she's still around. But it was awful timing, Grandma. I'm now sleeping upstairs until my parents finish the wall. Good spirit or not, it's still nerve-wracking to have a paranormal experience. Back in the winter of 2019, my partner and I had settled into a hotel for a few days before going on vacation elsewhere. I am somewhat sensitive. I've never seen a full-body apparition in reality, and never had any physical paranormal happenings up until this point, either. I've only ever felt feelings in environments. This hotel room was no different. Upon entering the room, I felt a sense of calm when stepping inside. However, there was also a sense of curiosity. I felt as if something was watching my partner and I. Over time, this feeling became more comfortable, to put it lightly. Over the course of the next few days, different feelings became more noticeable by the minute. Most of the feelings consisted of being watched. Eventually, I asked my partner on our second day there, "Hey, do you feel anything off about this room?" To this they responded, "No." Whatever was watching us noticed that I noticed them. That's when the experience turned from lingering to dark. Later that night in bed, I had a normal dream. I don't remember most of it, other than maybe one image of running curiously through a black hall of mirrors. Suddenly, as if I had blinked, I saw the hotel bed, my partner and I, sleeping. We were laying away from each other, but there was a mass between us. A dark mass. It leaned in closer to me, and I felt what can only be described as a light body pressure on my back and arm as it held around my torso. The thing spoke to me in my sleep, more specifically in my mind. It had a male voice, but took on the voice of a mixture of my partner and my first ex-partner. It casually threatened that it was going to hurt my partner. I couldn't move, and my perspective was going back and forth from my own perspective of laying on one side of the bed to seeing a bird's eye view of the bed. I wasn't lucid enough to tell it to go away, but did have enough control to ask why, and to say, "Don't hurt us." It then responded, "I don't want to hurt you, but I want to hurt your partner, and I'm going to." I kept telling it not to better not to leave us alone. Then it threatened to hurt me as well. I could feel its intent, so I stopped responding. To my silence it replied, "Good. Be glad that I'm not hurting you, but your partner is going to hurt. Right about now." As soon as it said "now," I jolted awake to the sound of my partner's blood-curdling scream. My partner's leg had developed a Charlie horse cramp in their sleep at the same time that the spirit had spoken its statement. I could still feel the spirit's energy upon wakening, and one thought popped into my head. I told you. The next morning, we packed our bags for the vacation. I could feel whatever had tormented my partner the other night watching us leave. I told my partner about the incident, and they jokingly told me not to sick any demons on them. But they did believe me. I've never had a spirit contact me so directly in my life before this. That spirit did not attach to me, surprisingly. It stayed in the hotel room, and it's unlikely that I'll ever go back there again. This happened when I was around 10, in a house where the second floor was still under construction. My mom and grandma had a major disagreement back when we were living in Toronto, and my grandma decided to move to her home country, Ecuador. Soon after, due to complications, my mom decided to give in and follow her. We moved in with my grandma, but since the house was a little small for 4 people, and since my great-grandmother was soon to be moving in as well, my family decided to extend a floor. For the meantime, my great-grandma was staying in a room extension with her own bathroom because she would have accidents frequently. The room was an extension outside, close to the main door. My great-grandma was really old, but still cognitive enough to have fun conversations with, so I would spend a lot of time talking with her outside. She started telling me about this little green guy that would visit her at night, and he would just sit on the TV and watch her. In South America, we grew up talking about duendes, leprechauns that would mess with people wandering around strange areas at night. It's kind of our folklore, like the chupacabras or skinwalkers. But since my grandma was getting old, my mom would just brush it off and blame it on her aging or her mental health. One night my family went to a dinner party, but since I had a best friend over, I insisted on staying home. It was getting really late, but we were waiting for one of our favorite shows to air on Cartoon Network. My family is very religious and hated these quote-unquote demonic cartoons, so we tried to watch quietly. I was under the impression that my great-grandma was resting in one of the rooms behind us, in my mom's room, because I kept hearing noises coming from down the hall. Suddenly, I hear my grandma's walker clicking its way out of the room, so I quickly turned off the TV and told my friend to be quiet. We hid under the blankets and waited until my grandma went back to the room. She used to walk with one of those 4-legged walkers, and would take her time as she moved. We thought she was just going to use the washroom, so we decided to wait it out. Her walking seemed very quiet, though, which was odd, but I didn't think much of it. She went to the washroom, but didn't open up the toilet lid. There was no noise, no peeing or anything. And the weirdest part? No word or call to see if we were sleeping or still up. We just heard the walking go straight back to the room quietly. Then suddenly I remembered that the dinner my family went to was meant to celebrate her. She wasn't home, and we were supposed to be alone. As soon as I realized that, we heard small footsteps sprinting from one room to the other, and then a glass breaking. We were petrified. We didn't know what was behind us, if it was someone that broke in or an animal, but we were too afraid to look. We stayed under the sheets until my family came back home. Fortunately, they arrived only moments after. As soon as my stepdad came in, we told him what happened. He brought my dog upstairs where the second floor was being built, as he was thinking that it would have been an animal that came in since the staircase was only being covered by a plastic sheet. My mom goes into my grandma's room and finds a glass jug on the floor with a broken handle. The jug was supposed to be in my room. Something had to have carried the jug and dropped it in there. My dog was also barking throughout the night, which was pretty common, but when he came in the house, he seemed really anxious to sprint upstairs, as if he knew something was there. My best friend and I have been through a couple of weird things back home, but nothing as vivid as this. Again, it could have been an animal, but that doesn't explain the metal walker noise that we heard. It could have been an intruder, but we would have definitely seen someone come through the plastic covering the stairwell. It could have been the little green guy my great-grandma talked about. A lot of times little shadows would rush through my peripherals, but I always thought it was just my imagination. She passed away only a couple months after this. But weird small footsteps and random dog chases never stopped. The footsteps I would hear didn't sound like small critters, since animals tend to bolt from place to place. The steps I remember hearing as a kid seemed much more meticulous and slow, and always late at night. My boyfriend at the time and I went to Key West in 2014 for vacation back in my junior year of college. Doing some bar hopping, we went into the main strip's Coyote Ugly bar. I ended up sitting next to this very thin, dark-haired woman. When I asked her if it was alright if I sat there, she turned her head toward me in an incredibly slow manner. She nodded her head up and down, equally slow. I don't think anything of it. My boyfriend and I order a drink, and we're talking amongst ourselves for a minute. I'm facing away from the woman, and I feel her tap on my shoulder. So I turn around, and she's raising her glass to me in cheers. I should explain what she looks like, because it's a lot like what I imagine a demon wearing human skin would look like. Bone thin, sallow, with stringy black hair, sharp cheekbones, and nose. Her eyes were black. I mean huge black pupils that didn't blink. They looked static. She does her cheers and opens her mouth to smile, and her gums are gray. Her teeth are gray and small, and I remember having this overwhelming feeling that she wanted to eat my flesh. I'm in pretty much panic mode at this point and whip my head back toward my boyfriend. He saw this woman too by now, and he grabs me by the arm to get us to move to the back of the room as quickly as possible. I'm basically cowering. I know, super brave. I always loved reading about demons, and possibly faced with one, I'm jello. I turn to start making our way out to the street, and the woman has got her head completely cranked around to stare at me from the bar. I feel her gazing at me as we leave, and I haul ass back to the hotel. She didn't say a single word throughout the entire encounter. I always regretted not asking her to speak. I will say, my boyfriend and I talked about it after and considered the gray teeth and mouth and general craziness possibly due to drugs. But I've seen my fair share of drug addicts. Even had one try to kidnap me. And this was not the same. I think about this episode pretty often, even years later. That feeling of encountering something soulless that wanted to harm me has never diminished. For context, I don't normally have a problem with sleep paralysis, and actually had to look it up to see if that's what I experienced. This past Saturday evening, my wife and son went to her mom's to use the pool and ended up staying late. I was home alone. I did some chores and ended up downstairs with the AC on and watching TV. I wasn't physically tired from chores, which was putting a load to wash, taking out trash, and cleaning up the kitchen counter. The next thing I know, I am deep asleep, although I'm mentally awake. I try to move my body and cannot. I can think like I'm awake, and I can hear myself groaning. I can see my room, and I'm lying on my sofa. It's dark outside, and I have the overwhelming feeling that there is someone in the room with me. I'm struggling to wake myself, and I can't. I know I'm laying on the sofa. I can hear the TV. I have consciousness of my surroundings, yet can't shake myself awake or move my body. I have this terrible feeling that there is someone on the other side of the room. My den is very long, with a family room attached to it, but I can't move my body to see who is there. I get the feeling like if I don't move, something bad is going to happen. I'm eventually able to shake myself awake and have movement of my body again, yet the room seemed brighter, like if it wasn't as dark as when I was trying to move myself awake. I don't see anyone there with me. The TV is still on, and I know that it was the same program that I heard in my paralysis state. The second episode happened last night. My son was in our bed, so I went to his room to lay down as I got tired of him taking over the bed. I was watching YouTube, the lights were off, the bedroom window was open. I somehow passed out without even realizing that I had fallen asleep, and had another episode of sleep paralysis. I'm lying there. I can hear the fan and the iPad playing a commercial between videos. Again, I get a sense of foreboding. Someone is at the window, then something moved in the room. I think the closet door creaked. I'm trying to shake my body to move, and I can feel my heart pounding. I eventually make my leg move off the side of the bed, and I must be making grunting noises and trying to move my foot to touch the floor. Then I'm able to turn over, and I sit up. I haven't had a lot of experiences with this before, and it almost felt like something else was controlling it. Not like drugs, as I don't do drugs, nor alcohol, as I haven't had a drink in weeks. It was almost like hypnotism or something controlling me to fall asleep so quickly and so deeply. This is a story that happened to me when I was just a fresh graduate, starting my first job at a temp agency. It was 2002, and my job was located in the middle of nowhere and very far from my home. Therefore, I took the effort of doing most of my job in the office till late at night, since I do not wish to come home and continue with work. Rather, that would give me some rest for the remainder of the night. I usually stayed up even later on Fridays, knowing that if I finished the work fully, the weekends would be golden for me. So, this story occurred on one of those Fridays when everyone else had already left. After making my prayers for the night, I continued with my work. There was no one I believed that was in the office, but I felt a presence. Perhaps it was another coworker working late just like me. I took that belief to heart. At one point in time, around 11 I believe, I needed to go to the toilet, which was located at the end of a long, dark hallway, lighted only by the green exit sign. I found that the toilet was locked, so I looked to the toilet that is on the next level. I took the staircase, which was lighted by a circular wall lamp, and found that the toilet was unlocked. Thankfully, I did my business and returned back to work. The next part of the story comes in a rather weird way. As I made my way back, passing by the locked toilet, I saw the shadow of someone by the office door beaming from the front light that I had left on. My guess is that either the coworker was about to leave or that she was taking coffee for the night since the pantry is near the entrance. When I got there, there was no one by the pantry or the entrance, so again I went back to my desk. I was trying to finish up that last bit of work when I started to peek through the gap between each desk, trying to see the other person who was working late at night, but somehow, no matter what, I was unable to spot him or her. When I got finished up about 15 minutes later, I decided to get myself a drink from the pantry. Then, the lights went off. Just as I took the can of juice from the fridge, I turned to find myself in total darkness. There was a voice calling out to me, trying to reach me, and I tried to find it. The voice was unclear at the beginning, but soon it became what I think the person was saying, "Help me." The sound was the strongest by the window which was facing the main road that was now deserted. I looked about in the darkness, seeing if there was anyone in distress, and as I did so, I felt a hand touching my shoulder. I turned around, and no one was there. At this point already, I knew that I needed to get the hell out, and so I went to my desk and started packing. Then it came. It came from outside, falling with a piercing scream and with a clear face. The face of a bloody woman. I quickly rushed to the window, opened it up, and looked at the ground, but there was no one. I made my way to the ground floor and to the main road, clutching my laptop and backpack as I tried to search for a cab, but it felt like nearly hours, despite it only being minutes before one came by. What kept me at the edge was the fact that I felt like 1,000 boots were marching toward me, shouting in Japanese commands. I kept my eyes on the road, but occasionally I turned back to see my office building. On the last turn, I saw a bunch of uniformed men with rifles, gray faces bayoneting a bloody woman, stepping on her body, throwing what I believed to be her baby in the air and killing it as it landed on the ground. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran from the scene. Recently I moved into a new house. Two close friends, let's call them E and R, moved in along with me. When we went to view the house, nothing seemed off about it. However, about a week in, we screwed up. E had been cleaning out the attic and came across a wooden box. It looked fairly new and we didn't think anything could ever go wrong with it. E and I looked inside the box. All that was there was 4 candles, an old matchbox with no matches, and a small wooden doll. E and I set it aside, not interested. We ended up putting it back in the attic, apart from the doll, which R wanted to put in her potted plant. We proceeded with our sorting and forgot all about the box. That night, when I went to bed, I felt as if I were being watched. It was unnerving, but I eventually fell asleep. A few hours later, I heard something bang against the floor above me. I would have brushed it off as his room was up there, if what had happened next didn't take place. For a bit of background knowledge, in September of 2017, R was in a car crash. The others were fine, but R ended up in a wheelchair. R called out for me. It wasn't calm as it usually was, but frantic. I moved into her room, and she asked me if I had heard the crash. I told her I had and thought that it was just E. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that E was working a night shift. It was unlike her to be so flustered, so I offered to stay with her, which she accepted. Soon after, we began to hear light footsteps and giggles outside R's room. We were scared, but continued to try and tune it out. R fell asleep, but I stayed with her, scared shitless by possible ghost children. Eventually, the stupid undead kids stopped running up and down the halls, so I assumed they left. I was then able to fall into a well-deserved slumber. Then, maybe an hour or so later, E got back from work. I know this because he is incapable of entering anywhere quietly. And then he screamed, like a grown man screaming as if he were a little girl. He ran up the stairs into my room and then out of my room because I was with R, and then he ran into R's room. He then told us what had happened. Apparently, he'd been putting his work bag down and felt as if he were being watched. He looked up and for a split second saw a little boy and girl holding hands. Now, normally I wouldn't have believed anything like this, but he is an honest bloke, and I saw the look of terror on his face. So I've been sitting on this story for 3 years, telling some close friends who respond with astonished looks and advise on mental health and think I'm completely insane. It's 11:17 in rural New Brunswick, Canada, and I'm getting in my car to head back to Fredericton from my parents' place in the middle of nowhere. I had just finished up a small gig at a local fair, having had 1 or 2 beers at the show. I'm just pulling out of my parents' driveway onto a dim country road going back to the city when I turn on my high beams to see a tall, lanky, completely black figure standing in the ditch on the right side of the road. I mean, this thing must have been 8 or 9 feet tall. It absorbed all light and had limbs no bigger around than a baguette. As soon as I saw it, it started to run up the ditch and across the road in a very fast, very strange, gliding kind of way. I slammed on the brakes and watched this thing run across the road and into a field on the other side of the road towards some woods. I'm getting goosebumps writing this, but I could still see its silhouette speeding across the field in my neighbor's yard as it went into the black of the night. I stopped for a moment, shivering, before speeding up the road to a safe distance. I had no idea what I had just seen, so I called my mom to tell her that I had just witnessed this tall, alien-looking creature less than 100 meters from our home. She and my sister searched online with what I had told them, and came back with an article on the black stickman phenomena, which fit exactly what I had seen on this normal August night in New Brunswick. This experience has really opened my mind to the paranormal, so for that I'm almost thankful. I was looking over my shoulder for a few weeks, afraid to go out at night, and I still feel unnerved when thinking about it. I haven't seen anything like it since, but have had some experiences with spirits growing up in what my whole family agrees is a haunted house. When I was a kid, I lived in a little one-story house with my dad, my older sister, and my stepmom. It was a nice and quiet place. We had hardwood floors and there was a hallway leading from the living room into where the bedrooms were. It was a rather dark hallway which turned to the left and led to a guest bedroom and my parents' bedroom. The reason it was dark was because there was just a single dim light on the ceiling between the two bathrooms and the second bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway before it turned left. There was also an attic door right above the master bedroom's door. We never really opened it. It's weird. It just didn't feel like we had permission to, even though we did and could use it any time. I can recall one day after school I returned home to the house being empty. My sister was at a friend's house and my parents went out to try and surprise us with McDonald's before we came back home. I remember calling out my sister's name to see if she was home as well as my mom and dad's name, and no one responded. I went into my parents' bedroom where they had a computer. I sat down and started to turn it on, hoping to get a few minutes of gaming in before my parents came back. As I sat there, the room felt like it was getting darker, but I told myself that my eyes were just adjusting to the computer monitor in front of me. The computer which was taking a rather long time to boot up. Back then I was maybe 10 years old. I looked around the room to see if my eyes would adjust, but it was still extremely dark even though the light was on, and it just seemed like they couldn't. It also started to feel colder and colder, and when I looked up again the ceiling was completely black, and the darkness shrouded the light above me with a thick black haze. Immediately I looked back at the computer to compose myself and tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just a kid that was creeped out for no reason. As I focused on the monitor, the room was cold and quiet. And suddenly, a woman's voice whispered shortly and sternly, my name. I could feel the wind on my ear and the pressure of someone holding my shoulder. I bolted out of the room, and moments later my dad came through the front door smiling and holding a kid's meal in his hand, asking me how my day at school went. I didn't tell him what had just happened. A little while passed, and my dad began having his own experiences in the house. Sometimes he would fall asleep watching his favorite TV shows on the sofa. In the middle of the night, when we had all fallen asleep, he would wake up and hear footsteps walking around the living room. He would also hear chains being dragged across the floor. At the time, we also had a dog. He said that our dog's head would follow the footsteps, and that was how he knew he wasn't just imagining it. The footsteps would lead into the kitchen, pausing for a moment before something dropped from the kitchen counter. Sometimes when one of us was alone in the house, we would hear little girls giggling and laughing in the bathroom at the end of the hall. I remember my dad talking to some of the adults in a serious tone. He said he could see the shadows of two people from underneath the door. He would open it after no reply, and there would be no one there. He would then notice that he was alone in the house. This was a common incident that many of us had experienced ourselves. My stepmom didn't like children, but she hid it very well from my dad. When he would leave for work, he would leave for 15 to 20-hour shifts. Sometimes she would put me in the basement and said if I couldn't behave myself like a person, I would be treated like an animal. The thing about being downstairs is that she would turn off the lights so that you would be downstairs and it would be completely black. It would feel like something was staring at me from the corner of the room. Something that was slowly creeping closer and closer to where I was sitting. Sometimes I would hear feet dragging in the distance, accompanied by tapping sounds similar to fingernails tapping on the concrete floor. This only happened soon after the sun had set and the basement was once again too dark to even see my hand waving in front of my face. As the sounds came closer and closer, I would hug my legs in a fetal position. At that point, I would sing a song from Anastasia, the one that my sister and I used to sing together, and hearing my voice made me feel less alone in that situation. Even as I felt the air thicken and the feeling of something weighing in next to me, waiting for me to open my eyes and take a look. Each time that I did manage to open my eyes in an attempt to see what it was, it would still be so dark that I didn't know if something was there or not. I learned how to toughen up and deal with that thing by treating it like a bully. Just don't let it get to you, don't let it bother you, I would tell myself. But the utter relief of the light turning on and being allowed to come back upstairs and watching my dad pull into the driveway was the best feeling in the world. Another one of my stepmom's favorite punishments would once again be in the basement. She would have my sister and I fold the clothes from the laundry machine. She would later tell one of us to go upstairs and then proceed to throw all of the clothes on the ground and then tell us to fold it again by ourselves. Downstairs, my sister and I knew that something was not right. The room had a TV and a small, dusty sofa. The door would always be open, and it felt like someone or something wanted you to come inside. It was almost magnetic. At times, we would have to go into the basement room whenever my stepmom had her friends over. We had to be quiet downstairs without a peep, or else she would get upset. Due to the giggling ghosts who were upstairs, we always seemed to get the blame, and were punished according to her mood. When I turned 12 or so, 2 of my dad's brothers moved into the house with us. One of my uncles slept in the guest bedroom, while their other uncle slept in the basement room. Sometimes we would go down there to see if he was hungry. When we entered the room, my uncle would be laying on the sofa with his eyes open, not blinking, and unresponsive. This would go on for a good hour or so. My dad said there wasn't anything downstairs, but he rarely went down there at all. My uncle said that there was something evil, and that it was trying to get into his body. My other uncle, who slept in the guest bedroom, said that when he was asleep he had a dream where a Confederate soldier without eyes kept screaming that they had been taken from him. He woke to see a floating blob of light right in front of his face. I remember one night as my sister and I were falling asleep, my dad kept yelling down the hall from the living room for us to stop talking and get some rest. He said it a few more times before my sister and I said we weren't talking. He then turned off the hallway light and said goodnight. Moments later, I opened my eyes, and behind our bedroom door was a little girl in old pajamas. She had long black hair and nearly blended in with the shadows. I stared at her and then covered my head with my blanket. Later on, 2 of my cousins moved in after my uncles moved out. They had our old bedroom, and my sister and I took the guest bedroom. My cousins were both boys, and we were supposed to help them get used to living with us. They kept fighting with each other. The youngest one would climb into my bed in the middle of the night because he didn't want to fight with his older brother. We had a lock on our bedroom door, and that made him feel better. Also, he did mention that the bedroom scared him, but I didn't ask why. Eventually, the oldest one started to walk around the house at night. We found makeshift weapons like a stick with sharp rocks on it, and a strong thread with something sharp on it as well. He said he was going to kill our stepmother and everyone else in the house. He was maybe just 12 or 13 at the time. Eventually, law enforcement became involved, and he was deemed insane. Once my dad found out about my stepmother's abuse, he swiftly divorced her, and we moved. We never saw her again. One thing I remember is while we were moving out, the landlord stopped by and had baked us all cookies. My dad asked them if anyone had died in the house. The landlords were shocked and said, "Yeah, there was an older lady who died from depression upstairs in the attic." They then asked my dad how he knew. He told them about our experiences. They also mentioned that the house was built on an old battleground. To this day, sometimes I drive past the house and think about knocking on the tenant's door. So I had to shut it off so that I could live a normal life again without seeing them. But my cousin, who has no abilities, has seen them in the house. At first, when he moved in, he didn't know that it was haunted. I didn't want to tell him that the house was haunted because I thought, well, maybe it's not. And if I told him, he would believe it was, and that would influence him in some way. If it was haunted, I was going to let him find out on his own, or if it didn't bother him, then I would let it be. As the weeks passed and things moved in front of our eyes, he started to hear his family members' voices calling his name from time to time in the middle of the night. It was the same experience that I had had. He would have a nightmare sometimes of something trying to come inside of the room, yet it was stuck on the other side of the door, unable to get in. It was beckoning him to let it inside, to open the door. It's odd because I actually have a video of it doing that, and it's heard in the video faintly. When I lived alone, it would occur very frequently, but instead of in dreams, it was literally in real life and happening on camera. I did not show him the video beforehand, so there's no way he could have known. Eventually, I did open up to him about it being haunted, but that it's not really a big deal or anything, since my family ends up in the haunted house usually, for some odd reason. I explained that if we made excuses and such, that the activity would remain low. For instance, if something slides across the floor in front of us, we just pass it off as something else, no matter how stupid that excuse or rationalization is, and we say it out loud, shrug it off, and move on. Sometimes if it happens again after that, we just make another excuse, and then it stops. If something pounds on our walls from all directions, which only usually happens for a few seconds, we just ignore it, and make another excuse. And then life goes on as normal. My cousin would be laying in bed at night, and he explained that he would see this almost rippling kind of apparition. I thought it must be an eyesight issue, so I asked him to show me where it was. Weirdly enough, it was the same wall that I had had a nightmare about months ago involving things trying to climb out of a black tar-like door with nearly 100 arms covered in the tar-like goo. So yeah, it was weird, and he didn't have that experience again. Anyway, in the room one day when I was living there on my own, I had seen a woman, pretty much the generic, typical ghost. Most of them don't seem to look like that in real life, but in movies they do. Just a young woman who floated through my bedroom door and then through the wall beside it. Nearly entirely see-through, and from the waist down, she looked as if she were made of mist or fog. No color at all, and also in a very old, almost wedding gown type of dress. Also in the room, I would often see glowing white, circular orb-like things that would float and then leave. almost like a flicker, but I thought it was just, I don't know, a headache or whatever. But it was always in one spot of the room. Well, my cousin saw it too, again in the exact same spot that I would usually see it in. And then I told him that it happens sometimes. He's gotten used to the house, and most of the activity stopped happening after I shut it off. I also bought a little spirit box and would use it outside whenever the activity would go up. Soon after I went back inside, life was back to normal and the activity would subside for another month or two. Before the spirit box, the activity was nearly unlivable, dangerous almost. Now it's extremely silent, like we have an actual home now. If anything, it's just a house that happens to be haunted, but a house nonetheless. With all of the haunted houses my family and I have lived in, my only advice is to never let a haunting consume you. I am aware of sleep paralysis. I understand your brain can project things, etc. I'm not denying that. That is what possibly could have happened, but damn did it scare me, so I'm going to tell you. Now, I have had sleep paralysis a fair few times in my life, but this is the scariest thing that I have ever experienced during a sleep paralysis episode. One night I woke up during a quite peaceful sleep. Across from my bed is the TV and, of course, a wall behind that TV. I opened my eyes and instantly noticed that I was in sleep paralysis. I worked on moving my fingers, but I heard something. It sounded like something floating, like woo, woo, woo sound. Being on my stomach, I could see across my room, which was my TV. The wall behind that TV, I shit you not, was all of a sudden a window. I didn't see it change into a window. It was already a window when I looked at it. I start breathing heavily. The sound is getting closer and the brightest light that I have ever seen shines into my room, but not enough for me to lose vision. A UFO just floats by my window. Meanwhile, I'm still telling myself to move and not freak out. It continues to pass, until I see it slowly backing up outside the window. I'm still trying to move. The UFO sits there. I try calling for my housemate, which of course doesn't work. I feel something malvoyant at the end of my bed. I see a tall, dark shadow. And as it reached out to grab or touch or whatever it planned to do, I shot up from my bed. Absolutely the most scared that I had ever been. I was breathing heavily, and when I did shoot up, the window became my wall again. There was no sound. Most of my sleep paralysis episodes, I don't usually remember falling asleep. But this night I didn't go back to sleep. One night when I was about 16, I walked outside onto my front porch after an argument with my mom and her husband. After about an hour of pacing and talking myself out of just leaving, the sun was setting, so I turned back and started heading back toward the house. When down the hill, about 150 yards, I see something slowly walking out of the tree line that looks to be a young woman in a dress, but the setting sun is shining off of whatever she's wearing. I don't think it's normal, and I'm a little freaked out, so I run inside and grab my binoculars. I come back, and she's only moved a few feet, walking very slowly, long steps. I focus in, and she's glowing. Gold. And she's dressed like a nun. Again, she was glowing gold. I've never seen her since, and I've spent the last 12 years searching for answers of what I witnessed that day. In the early 2000s, when I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents had just gotten through divorce and my mom started dating this guy. He would come over to our house regularly. Things didn't seem that bad at first, but he actually drank daily. This was something I didn't understand yet at my age, but yeah. So this guy wasn't all that bad with my sister, who was 2 or 3 at the time, but he took some sadistic interest in hurting me. He would arrive at our house almost every day, and the first thing he would do was take off his belt and start beating me with it. This got to the point where I would hide if I knew he was coming. As for why my mother didn't leave him then, he threatened to kill us if she did. Now, this one incident is burned into my memory. On one random day, he had found a nice little cardboard box. He picked me up and shoved me into said box and sat on top of it. My mother was doing the dishes, and I assumed she couldn't hear me screaming for her as I peered out of the box's handle hole at her back, before he covered the holes with his hands. I screamed for a good few minutes as this asshole just laughed about torturing me. The only reason he got off the box was that I had a small screwdriver in my pocket that I used to stab him right in his ass cheek. This got him to fly up off the box, and pissed him off because he wasn't having fun anymore. He picked me up again and carried me off to my room, where he proceeded to beat me with his belt. Then he left me in my room after taking my lamp and locked my door. I was afraid of the dark, so I cried and screamed some more. I did so until he finally left, and my mother came and opened my door again. The random beatings would go on until he eventually got in trouble for something and ended up going to jail. Sometimes I think maybe my mother called the police on him. He called my mom from jail and told her that if she found anyone else, that he would kill her, me, and my younger sister. We ended up moving 3 cities over, and as far as I know, my mom never heard from him again. This guy is almost single-handedly responsible for several of my long-term phobias, and as an adult now, I'd kick his ass if I saw him again. While I was growing up, around the age of 3 until 6 or 7, I had an invisible friend. He would only show up every once in a while. I thought maybe he was lonely and also needed a friend. I disliked the feeling of someone not having a friend when I was little, so I gently worked hard to be his friend, just so that he would have someone. Usually he would appear whenever my stepmom would be mean to us, and we were left alone for a bit afterward, or when I was scared or was having a paranormal experience, which at the time I didn't understand. My teacher was fond of me and told my dad that I was special and could grow into either a very bad or a very good person. While the other kids would play on the playground together, I would sit on the hill and just enjoy the grass and trees and wind, and my teacher would sit down next to me, enjoying it in silence as well. I remember one time the other kids were on the playground and, without being told to, stopped playing and sat down with us, and we all just sat on the hill enjoying the breeze. It was a pretty nice memory, just all of us enjoying the silence and having a moment, until the school bell rang. My dad didn't think that the little boy was fake, while my stepmom tried to get me to see a specialist. My dad did eventually take me to a specialist in order to make my stepmom happy because they constantly argued about it. I remember that at our last appointment, I was in the waiting room. My dad opened the door and went into her office, and I remember as my dad's back was turned to me that the specialist concluded that nothing was wrong with me, that I was just a normal kid. My dad said something along the lines of, "I thought so, thank you," and he took me out for ice cream afterward. My dad later opened up to me after his divorce and said that in every generation some of the kids have gifts and that some people don't like what they can't understand, and that's why he thought my old friend wasn't made up. To this day, I don't know if he was a ghost or an invisible friend I made up as a little girl. But I do remember that he had his own personality that I was not in control of. He never really talked about anything, like about his life, even if I asked him questions. He just wanted to play, or he would show up and say, "It's going to be okay." I remember after a while, as my stepmom hated it more and more, he sort of slowly went away. Sometimes I would call out for him, which I didn't do before, and he wouldn't show up. Sometimes when I would cry, I would sort of wait for him, hoping a little bit that he would show up. But he never did. I eventually forgot about the little boy until one day in middle school. It felt like something which was not very good was in my bedroom with me that night. The house was oddly quiet. I figured I was being silly, so I fell asleep. That night, I had a dream that I was inside of a broken-down city as a girl again. It was a misty night with puddles on the road. I could even feel the rain falling lightly on my skin. I remember that my hair was wet. The city seemed to be empty. The street lights looked old, and there weren't any lights on anywhere. Many of the building's windows were broken. Inside of the rooms were dusty and unkept. I also noticed that there wasn't any furniture inside of them or lights or doors. It was just rooms. I called out, and my voice kind of echoed as the rain tapped the ground. I noticed rather quickly that I wasn't alone. Something heard me. As a figure of something slowly crept in the distance on the street behind me, I looked closer, but it wasn't a person. I heard a loud screech, and I instantly started to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Whatever was inhabiting that city wasn't expecting me. Suddenly, I was being chased by a bunch of shadowy, semi-human-looking things. They ran fast and would jump from the wall of one building to another building, clinging onto the sides, the bricks falling and hitting the streets and the sidewalks behind me. They nearly caught up to me until I turned the corner and started to run over to an old wooden fence on the outskirts of the city. I felt the water on the grass, and I think I slipped at least once. I saw the little boy on the other side of the dark brown, worn-down fence, and he said, "Take my hand." I did, and as we ran away through an open field in an attempt to reach some woods on the other side, those things were moments away from catching us. Their claws dug into the ground. Some of the speckles of dirt flew past my face. Then I woke up. On my ceiling above my bed, there was a huge man in armor and medium-length brown hair. His hair moved, and little parts of his clothes moved with it, as if they were submerged. But it didn't look to me like he had been near water. He had a silk cloth. It was either red or purple. The only way I remember it is because part of it had floated steady near his hair and face. Light seemed to emit not only from his body but from underneath his skin as well. As I looked at his face, he had an expression of warmth and calm, and it felt like we knew each other. He seemed so familiar. Only the area from the top of his head until about his waist or a little below it could fit within the space of my ceiling. I remember his eyes. It was like he were trying to tell me something. That he was the little boy the entire time, and it was going to be okay. The only way that I can describe the feeling of familiarity I had is, you know the feeling when you see someone after a while, and you realize you knew each other when you were kids? Eventually, after what felt like a longer time than what it probably was, the man faded away, and it was just me in my empty room. That morning when I went upstairs to fix myself some breakfast, my uncle was talking in the living room about having a dream. I didn't really catch what his dream was about, though, until he mentioned that he woke up in the middle of the night when he heard aggressive scratching and banging on his door. My dad didn't believe him, so he brought my dad and my sister and I downstairs to show us that it was true, to show my dad that he wasn't making it up. There were long, deep scratches on the other side of his bedroom door from the hallway. I can't explain what happened or what had made those scratch marks. I usually don't open up about my experiences. I honestly haven't had the courage to until a few days ago. Rarely have I shared them. I still haven't told my family about my dream, or the man I had seen either, but they still talk about the scratches. There's a ghost inside of mine and my girlfriend's new home. We've heard stomping in the kitchen in the middle of the night, among lots of other things. The issue that I have is that I wonder why it never shows itself or does anything in my presence. I've come home to doors open, and the animals in the corner shaking. Or I'll hear things in the other room falling, and sure enough, there will be something on the floor, but it never does anything while I'm in the room. My girlfriend, however, has seen the ghost, has had it open doors that she was next to, and heard it whisper. Is my energy off-putting to the ghost, or does my girlfriend attract it through her fear? I do not fear the ghost, and view it as more of an annoyance than anything, whereas she is terrified of it. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettal, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor. My sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I had walked into a wall of, I'm not sure what to call it, bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues, other than just waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air were crushing her. That unnerved me even more, just knowing that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented into my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet toward the end of my bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room, because when I turned toward what had grabbed me, a huge, looming black shape was visible in the darkness, as if a man were in there with me. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there been nothing there. The window was locked from the inside. There was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night, terrified. The next morning, we were at breakfast, and my sister mentioned that she was also up half the night, because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, but when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything else, but it still freaks me out. I am a 26-year-old female who has been having constant dreams where someone grabs me by my ribs and their fingers sink into my body. They're pushing and pushing their hands into my ribs, and I'm crying out for it to stop, and it hurts for real. A crushing pain makes me want to curl up and beg for it to stop. It's the real deal. In one specific scenario, in a dream. I gasp and sit up in my bed. This is the dream, remember, so a lucid dream, if you will. I sit up in my bed, and I am scared of my room. I grab the blanket closest to me and realize that it's at that stage of early morning where the sun will be coming up soon, but hasn't quite just yet. I feel this terror for some reason, and then a man suddenly comes into my room. He's in a long, blank t-shirt. He's bald and scary with bloodshot eyes, and he's pale and just... He looks at me instantly and rasps, "Don't think I haven't forgotten what you owe me." I swear, I can never unhear this. And then he jumps on me and instantly starts to dig his fingers into my ribs. I can't even explain how bad it hurts and how it can feel so real. I'm wincing, I'm trying to shrink into myself, make the pain stop. It's so bad I can barely even beg to stop it, but nothing stops it. Until I finally wake up. I sat up in bed and prayed that it wasn't going to happen again, and just turned on the light. The sun was coming up anyhow, and I didn't want to be in bed anymore. Of course, I was slightly anxious about turning the bedroom door corner in case that thing was real. Anyway, I have a lot of sleep paralysis issues, but this was the first of these pain in the ribs dreams. Now I have a few from time to time. Just the other night, I was in a prison and someone attacked me and jabbed my ribs, holding on to me tight and just repeatedly jabbing and holding my ribs hard as I was praying for it to stop and begging for them to stop and crying. I don't know what it means. Also, I'm totally healthy, with no pain in my ribs or anything like that in daily life. Am I being attacked by a spirit? Is this really something? This past weekend, my boyfriend came over and we were hanging out downstairs. I soon got tired, so I ended up going upstairs to my bedroom. I immediately felt a presence following me as I walked up the stairs. It felt as if it were following behind me, and there was something breathing on my neck. The feeling when you know that something is there. Me being scared, I refused to look back. I just plop into bed and face the wall, hoping that nothing happens. I still feel like there's something there, but this time it feels like someone is just watching me sleep. Then it starts to get hot. Even though I was scared, I turned to open the window, and there is a holographic type of ghost hovering over my bed. I turn around again, not getting up. I lay there facing my wall, so uncomfortable for a minute or two. I quickly get the courage to open the window and go lay back in bed, but before I get there, my LED TV starts flashing and changing the color mode. Mind, these lights only turn on when the TV is on because they're connected to my TV's USB, and I was unable to turn them on myself when the TV was off. I quickly grabbed the remote and turned it off. Then, all of a sudden, the empty Starbucks cup sitting on my nightstand table falls off in a weird way, as in it looks as if it were being pushed. I turned on my bedroom light, grabbed my phone, and yeeted out of there. I was so terrified. So, since my medication changed, I haven't been experiencing sleep paralysis that much anymore. But for years, I've had it on a constant basis, nearly every day. I can elaborate on the neurological stuff behind sleep paralysis, but basically, it's very related to stress, anxiety, and a bad sleep schedule. Anyway, I usually don't have auditory or visual hallucinations during sleep paralysis, But almost during every episode, I experience the feeling of leaving my body. I wake up in my bed without being able to move, and I feel my body start to float, accompanied by this awful fear that at any time I might fall down and die. Sometimes I even get to actually see my own body sleeping on my bed from above, but it's always hazy and I can't actually make out any of my physical features. I simply know that it's me on the bed. At other times I have the same feeling of leaving my body, but instead of floating, it's something pulling me by the feet and dragging me out of my bed. I don't see anyone. It's just the feeling of being dragged. I would love to know if anyone else has experienced this during sleep paralysis. Is this merely a symptom of it? Or could I really be having an out-of-body experience? I'm Catholic, but not very religious at all, so I'm wondering about other spiritual possibilities. This happened a few years ago while I was still in college. My best friend of many years is back in town, so we decided to get together and we stayed out fairly late, but hey, we're college kids, nighttime is our thing. My friend is very, very Catholic, and she decided to drive us this night. Mind you, neither of us was doing any drinking. After many shenanigans and lots of catching up, it was time to go home. It was probably around 2, 3 a.m. Still not exhausted, but she definitely was. Well, I'm staring at her dash where one of her many Catholic baubles were in the car when we get to the last light before she drops me at my house. I look out the window, as one does, and was met with the person in the car next to us staring into the car, and I kid you not, I screamed. The guy had gray skin, black eyes with no white, and a smile that was too long with sharpened teeth. He didn't break eye contact with me, and I was freaking out. My friend was completely oblivious until I said her name. She somehow didn't hear me scream. I, as calmly as possible, told her to look at the guy in the car next to us, and then she silently screamed too, and then proceeded to freak out and gunned it out of the intersection. Once again, this was 3 a.m., the light was still red, and she was not having this. She sped to my house and had me watching behind the car to make sure that we weren't being followed, whilst praying aloud, something she never does as she knows that I'm not religious. A few very short moments later, she pulls up in front of my house. She also put her high beams on as I walked to my door because she was, again, not about this. After I was safely inside, she called my cell and had me on the phone until she made it to her house all of 3 minutes later. We were both really shaken up about it the next day, but we never talked about it again. Anytime I've tried to bring it up, she shudders and changes the topic immediately. She did tell me she went to be blessed the next day, on a random Tuesday. I can still feel the soul-shaking sensation of looking that guy in the eyes. I'm not saying it couldn't have been some dude dressed up in a costume or something, but it shook both of us to our core. It was a Monday night, at around 3 a.m, and I honestly don't feel like this was a normal human occurrence. I worked at Hotel del Coronado, opened in 1888, on overnight shifts very often. We have historic pictures all over the walls of Babe Ruth, Roosevelt, Marilyn Monroe, etc. My overnight manager kept a tiny red notebook next to him every shift. Every strange occurrence that would take place would be noted. We have obnoxious ghost tours with crappy unreal stories going on all the time. But in reality, they could have just asked the night crew for some tales. We would have some items turn on and off, which was normal with old wiring. We would receive creepy phone calls. People would see figures that would disappear and hear things when no one was there. Bellmen would find children's handprints littered all over windows and mirrors when they have not seen a child all day. But one story stuck out from the others. The overnight manager was doing his laps around the halls as he does every night. Some were curved sharp, where you couldn't see what was on the other side. It was around 3 a.m., of course, when a hooded, dark figure darted far ahead across his path. He shouted and scurried quickly. He turned the tight corner to find an empty hallway and a room door. No sign. It was just open. My manager sat, puzzled, thinking of how he had never entered that room and was curious of the layout of it. In hospitality, you must be able to describe every inch of the rooms. He wandered back to his office and scrolled through the room numbers, finally stumbling onto the one from earlier. Then he sat in shock when he discovered the room's snapshots. The first picture in the layout file was of himself on his first day of work. One early summer morning in 2000, I got up and ready to drive my mom to her job at a local retirement home. It was dark starting out, but the sun was gradually coming up. I dropped her off and started returning to her house. Halfway back, driving on a country road densely populated with trees and houses, I noticed a car coming because I could see its high-beaming lights from a short distance. I also saw a large, jet-black dog in my path, standing completely still with its head pointed forward. It had a slender build. Having only a few seconds to think, I decided to continue forward and brace for the impact from running into its body. I closed my eyes as I got the closest to it, and continued to drive without swerving, and to my surprise, I felt nothing. I slowed down to check for the dog, but there was absolutely nothing back there. As I continued my drive, I felt strange because there was no way that I would have missed that animal. It was not facing me. It was facing right. I would have struck it broadside. Anyway, I'm thankful I didn't swerve. I feel like had I swerved, things would have been very much different for me today. I do believe that I could have died. Okay, so this has happened 2 times that we noticed. The first time was 3 months ago. At 2 a.m., my husband was playing an Xbox game. Name of the game was Halo. So it was only my husband. My kids were asleep upstairs, and I was down in the basement in our room in bed. I was reading. He told me that he was on the couch. The game was paused since he was looking in his phone for a cheat or something for it. By the stairs, he clearly heard, "Mommy." My daughter doesn't call me like this, but they were asleep. He even checked. This was yesterday. At 5 p.m., I was coloring in the living room. The TV was on a Parking Wars episode, and my kids were upstairs playing a game. The hubby was outside mowing the yard. I clearly heard, "Mommy? Mommy, Mommy!" Clearly a little girl, and it sounded like it was behind me, not where my kids would be. And it was not my daughter's voice. Now today, I was folding clothes and had small hand towels by me. I watched as they were pushed off of the couch and away from me. Not like they would if they had just fallen down. This happened to me a few months ago, and just once. I was sleeping on my couch when I was suddenly in a paralysis state. I couldn't move no matter what I did. As I was trying to move, I heard a female voice laughing in my ear. I couldn't see them, but I clearly heard that they were laughing. I tried to scream, but couldn't let out a sound. Then I woke up, a little sweaty and terrified. My heart was pumping so much that it hurt my ears. I looked everywhere, but saw no one. I didn't go back to sleep after this, because this wasn't my first experience, and I realized if I go to sleep again, the same thing would happen. This was the first time I ever experienced something terrified, so I didn't risk it, and stayed up all night. Ever since, I've never had an experience like this one again. I should also mention that I live in a house that gives off a terrible vibe and has a history of violence. The poor house suffered from an abusive family. It's possible that this house brings out the worst in people, because my mom unfortunately lost herself. She was now abusive and worse. She was a kind woman who didn't want any problems, but unfortunately we had an abusive parent figure. But save that story for another time. When I was 16, I started dating this 20-year-old. It was a very bad relationship in which I was cheated on and treated like crap, but that's another story. Anyway, after my 17th birthday, I finally dumped him and got him to leave me alone. A couple months later, I was on Skype with one of my old friends around 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I hear tap, tap, tap on my window. Now, my bed is right next to, kind of underneath my window, and my bedroom is on the other side of the house from my parents. I asked my friend if he had heard anything, and he said no. A few seconds later, tap, 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 and he said yeah, that he had heard that. I agreed, ended the Skype call, and ran to my parents' room. I woke my mom up, and after telling her why I woke her up, she stopped being angry, and we tried to see if anyone was outside the house. No dice. So I slept in my parents' bed with them. At 17. The next day, my dad had apparently seen vague shoe prints outside my window. It happened twice more, and after the third time, my mom called the non-emergency police line and was suggested to put up a motion light and/or a security camera. We put up a motion light that day. I've yet to hear knocking on my window since the light was put up, and it's been 2.5 years. I'm about 95% certain that it's my psycho ex, because he would come to my window between 1 and 3 a.m. when we were together sometimes and knock. Also, one of my friends who had mutual friends with my ex said that my ex was in the area. He lived about 30 miles away from me, the nights when the knocking happened. So for my cheating asshole of an ex, let's not meet again. For years, I've dealt with the disappearing object phenomenon, but lately, items have started appearing or reappearing as well. Just this morning, for example, I woke up and went into my kitchen to make coffee, and a random pack of paper coffee cups was sitting in the middle of my kitchen counter. No one else lives here or has access to my house, and I always set an alarm at night, so I would hear it if someone had tried to get in. I literally have no clue where this pack of coffee cups came from. It just appeared out of thin air. I'm grateful in a way, because it sure was convenient to have the cups this morning, but still, who put them there? I even checked my Amazon history to see if somehow I bought these without remembering, but no such purchase was there. I've had other objects randomly appear in my bathroom too. lip glosses that aren't in a color that I would normally buy. I've had strange food items that I didn't buy appear in my pantry too. Boxed soups, ketchup, I don't even like it. Mustard, don't use it that much. And a random bottle of soy sauce. I don't even know what to think about this. Here is the chilling tale of one of my stepmoms, who we'll call Lisa here, experiences with ghosts that she has conjured through her old Ouija board. So Lisa had just divorced her ex-husband and was living alone in a new house with her 2 kids. She moved to get away from the torturous spirits or demons in her old house. She was settling down with a broken heart and a new life. She went to bed after forgetting to pray one night. She did this because it was what the priest told her to do to solve her problems with the paranormal. It seemed to work, she told me, but when I didn't do it, it would all come back. Lisa had no paranormal experiences while she was in that house. Until now. On the night she didn't pray. Her oldest kid was 7 and now sleeping alone. Her youngest was 3, and Lisa kept her sleeping in her room because she felt like she had to keep an eye on her. Because of all the experiences, she was a worrywart. Anyway, she falls asleep and wakes up to 3 knocks. She knows this all too well. She lit a sage, prayed, and went back to sleep. This didn't work. That night she kept hearing scratches on her wall above her head. She turns to look up and sees a face in the pitch black dark. Lisa just woke up and thought it was her imagination. But then came a feeling of impending doom. A feeling also that she knew too well. She turns on her lamp, turns around to see a black mist looming next to her bed. She grabs her daughter who is sleeping with her and grabs a Bible. She screams for the mist to go away and everything calms down. She flicks on the light, paces around the room, and looks over to where she heard the scratching sounds earlier. To her horror, she sees 3 scratch marks the size of tiger claws above her bed on the wall. The scratches were on her wall until she put up new wallpaper. I asked her stepdaughters. One of them remembers her mom screaming at a wall. She never saw what my stepmom saw, but they wondered why they saw the scratch marks. So before some of y'all say I'm making this up, it's not my responsibility to prove it. So I always struggled with sleep paralysis, but one time, maybe 3 years ago, I woke up from my sleep, but I wasn't able to move at all. I saw a very slim, abnormally tall, black figure in the corner of my room. I looked at him. He was looking at me, his face down. When I looked at him, he just calmly walked away from my room, and I woke up. To this day, I still think about it. And I found out thousands of people all around the world see the exact same thing. I can't believe it's all psychological. How can everyone see the same thing? From China to Ireland, USA to Turkey? It doesn't make sense. I think that we all may have witnessed something otherworldly. About a year ago, I bought a house and started living alone. A few months of me living there and everything seemed normal and fine. except for one morning. On that morning, I woke up and felt like I was pinned down and that my bed was moving towards the door and back toward my wall. All I remember is trying my hardest to move, but I felt paralyzed. I don't have a history of sleep paralysis, and I also have a hard time believing in ghosts, but this was a pretty crazy experience. Nothing has happened since that morning, but I still don't know what was happening. This happened to me a few months ago. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was on my back, and there was a man standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me. He was wearing black. He looked very calm. I think he was floating because he was high up in the air. I have always been freaked out about ghosts, but for some reason I did not panic, and I just stared back at him for a few seconds. After he seemed to realize that I was awake, he was surprised and appeared nervous. He then turned away as if he was leaving and disappeared. I never had any experiences with sleep paralysis, so I don't think that this was the reason that this happened. Also, my dog was sleeping next to me, and she did not wake up. Even after he left, I was not afraid. I truly do not understand why. This just happened about 30 minutes ago. I was in the kitchen, and as I turned around, the very strong scent of my mom's distinct perfume hit me in the face. This happened 3 times. Now, my mother had an unusual mix of perfumes she used to wear, and was known to wear a lot of it. Also, she had a hint of air fresheners that she also had a lot of in her house. Mom passed away over 2 years ago and had never been to this house. We've only lived here 18 months. And we don't have anything here that smells the same as that. It was so strong and so distinct that my heart immediately pounded, and I shouted to my partner, "I can smell my mother." I thought I saw something climb the stairs earlier today too, but passed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. Now, I think there may be more to it. A few years ago, my mom was sleeping downstairs, and she had an encounter with something inhuman. Anyways, I used to always get scared at night, and I would knock on their door to sleep with them. And one night, my mom heard a knock on her door, and she assumed it was me, so she said, "Come in," while still half asleep. She heard the door open, and heard something quickly patter across the ground and jump on the bed, and it began whispering in her ear and mimicking her voice. She freaked out, and opened her eyes, only to see a very skinny, small, webbed-looking creature running out of the room. Me and my dad awoke to her screaming. We believe the house was haunted because we all had paranormal experiences there. We believe it came to be haunted because the previous owners performed satanic rituals, etc. When I showed her that skinwalker picture that kind of went viral, she said they looked really similar. But we don't know if this was a skinwalker or a malvoyant spirit.